I sat there, dumbfounded. I stared at the document for what seemed like an eternity. The crisp white paper crinkled as I gripped it tighter in my hands. A shock slowly gave way to panic, which began to claw at me, slowly at first, and then it came in great rushes, like a dam that had cracked wide open. Taking a deep breath, I tried to steady my nerves. Even after all this time, whenever I think of sedatives, I can't help but think about Zane. Come on, get it together, I told myself. You've been through stuff way worse than this. Just telling myself that helped enormously. It was also quite true. About 7 years ago, I had a student in my class named Zane. When I taught him, he was one of my top students. He also happened to be one of the nicest kids that you'd ever meet. Zane never talked back or did anything wrong. And his parents were by all appearances wonderful people, and it was a pleasure to have him in my class. One of the most extraordinary parts about being a teacher is seeing your former students grow up. You see them grow into maturity, but no matter what happens, you can't help but always see them as you knew them as children. Sort of how a parent sees their child. Most of the students who have passed through my class have grown into sensible, well-adjusted young men and women. Zane, well, he was one of the others. I don't know what happened exactly, but for some reason, he changed. It was right as he was about to go into junior high levels. And in a small private school like Pine Valley, the word travels fast. All of my colleagues began to whisper about Zane's sudden behavior change. I tried to never pay attention to it, thinking the gossip petty and beneath them. But deep down, I knew that they had a point. This previously hard-working and happy young man became quiet and withdrawn. He became something of a loner, which, while not uncommon for kids of that age, it still broke my heart to see. There was just something about it that made you do a double take. Whenever I saw Zane in the halls, I would say hello, and he would quietly respond, and that was the end of it. Eventually, Zane graduated and moved on to high school. I never forgot about him and checked on him as often as I could, but sadly, he was out of my reach. All I could do was hope for the best. I will never forget that day, November 17th, 2011. I had just come home from work when I got a phone call. It was my boss, the principal of White Pine Valley, Sheila Fransworth.
Vanessa, it's Sheila. Listen, I have some bad news.
I felt my heart sink as she spoke. Sheila sounded strained. I had never seen her like that before, nor has she sounded like that since. What is it? I took a deep breath as I braced myself.
It's Zane. He was arrested this morning.
I almost dropped the phone in shock. No, this couldn't be happening. How? I managed to mumble out.
There was a bomb threat at the high school this morning. The police traced the call to Zane. And well, I guess one thing led to another and they searched his house and stuff. They found posts on his computer where he talked about committing a mass shooting.
Thank God I was already sitting, because if I hadn't have been, my legs probably would have given out from under me. I can't believe it.
I don't blame you, Vanessa.
Sheila agreed.
But there's more.
Oh, fuck.
Oh, fuck is right. Apparently, Zane wasn't just talking. In his locker, they found a few hunting knives, along with a list of his fellow students. Beside each name, there was a phrase explaining why they needed to be punished, in his words. Zane also got a little creative, in that he had plenty of drawings to go with his list. Pretty detailed, gruesome ones too. So, as you can imagine, they took the kid into police custody. They called me for background on him.
Oh, fuck. Man, I feel like I failed him. I said more at myself than at Sheila. I had never felt so useless as a teacher before.
Hey, don't blame yourself.
She gently corrected me.
You are one of the best teachers in my school. You bent over backwards for that kid and tried to help him.
In my head, I knew she was right. But in my heart, it still gripped at me to know what happened to one of my students. If I had done something, anything, would it have made a difference? You're right. Sheila said a couple more things, but for the life of me, I couldn't tell you what they were. I felt numb to everything. Laying in bed that night, my thoughts were all over the place. I kept replaying everything I knew about Zane in my head, obviously microanalyzing every interaction I had with him. Looking back on it, it was an impressive act of self-flagellation. The next few days passed in a similar fashion. I would drag myself through the days at school, but come nighttime, I would lie awake and fester over what happened. This kid, a student in my own class, had seriously thought about going on a rampage at school. Would he have done that to me? Disbelief turned to fear as I suddenly began imagining myself being in the position of Zane's high school peers. Believe me, as a teacher these days, I'm well schooled in a procedure for lockdown. But somehow, this was different. Perhaps because it was so close to home. Someone I had actually known and taught. He could have easily turned on me as well. When I was instructing my students, I began to imagine Zane sitting there. It was only for a moment, but it was still terrifying. I still wasn't sleeping at night too, but during the day, I was a mass of energy. I guess I thought that if I was the perfect teacher, I wouldn't have another student like that pass through my class. After a particularly brutal night of not sleeping, I decided to do something about it. I went to the school counselor and asked for a recommendation for someone to talk to. Since she knew all too well of the Zane situation, she recommended me to a psychiatrist who specialized in traumatic incidences. After a few sessions, he put me on a medication to see if it would help me relax and sleep. At first, it seemed to help, but then on the fourth day, it came with an unexpected side effect. That night, I dreamt I was running through a maze of lockers. My feet thudded on the black and white checkered floor as I sprinted down the halls. I was terrified. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it would burst through my chest. It seemed like no matter how hard I tried or how fast I ran, something or someone was always faster. I heard myself scream out to whatever was chasing me, saying that I hadn't done anything. All I heard in response was a cold, emotionless laugh. And then I suddenly found myself facing a wall. With my back to it, I turned to face what was following me, and it was Zane, just standing there, staring at me.
"Why are you doing this?"
I said to him.
"I was good to you."
A sick smile twisted its way onto his face in response.
"So you think?"
It hissed in a voice that was nothing like Zane's. I was then staring down the barrels of a shotgun. A deafening blast emerged from it, and I woke up in my bed with a jolt. I was panting like I had just run a mile. I frantically looked around my room to make sure that it was all real. Everything was as it should be. But I was still pretty rattled from that nightmare. I didn't immediately go off the medication, in the hopes that the dream would be a one-time thing. Sadly enough, though, it wasn't. The dreams got even worse after that. Once, I even had a dream where I arrived into my classroom to see a welcome class written on the blackboard in blood, and the desks were dotted with bullet holes. Believe me, it only took a few days for me to drop the medication after that. After this, I took up meditation, and I actually found it quite helpful. Slowly, things began to go back to normal. But I won't lie, there is the occasional moment where I'm reminded of Zane. Once, I could have sworn that I saw him at the mall, and when that happened, I almost screamed. But I immediately realized that it wasn't him. Zane and his family had moved out of the area after the incident long ago. But that still doesn't quite totally stop the adrenaline you get when something like that happens. I shoved the paper away after a pause. It was time to focus on the matter at hand. I would not be taken by surprise this time. This was all a simple process of elimination. Kyle hadn't slipped me the sedative because I would have known it. Not to mention, it would have been obvious to others as well. He hadn't given it to Hunter either, because I was able to observe his behavior. Jane hadn't been acting unusual either. No, the only possibilities were that he was taking it himself, or was using it on someone outside of the family. I'd have to keep an eye on Kyle when he slept. Maybe that was the connection. Hunter always said that his dad went to fight the bad guys at night. Taking a deep breath, I knew what I had to do. Moving quickly so I would be done before Kyle got home and from his golf game, I looked up pictures of the drug in question. Tiny little orange capsules came up, and then I went to the upstairs bathroom. Combing through the medication cabinet, I looked through everything, all the pill bottles, but there was nothing. I had slammed the cabinet shut in irritation when I realized it. Inside Kyle's desk was a container of Tic Tacs. They were filled with what I assumed were the orange-flavored ones, so I didn't think anything of it at the time. Sprinting down to his office, I flung open the desk drawer, and there they were. I opened the container and smelled it. That refreshing citrus smell was nowhere. There was no chance in hell that these were orange Tic Tacs. I felt my stomach turn itself into a knot. Why does he have these? Even better, why was he hiding them like this? Right at that moment, I heard the garage door opening. I hastily tossed the container back into the desk and closed it. Running upstairs, I threw myself back onto the couch and turned on the TV, just as Kyle was unlocking the door.